After You, My Dear Alphonse is a story by Shirley Jackson. Plot. Introduction. We are first introduced to Mrs. Wilson, Johnny and Boyd. That is also when we learn that Boyd is an African American. Rising action. There are a lot of points leading up to the climax, which is rising action. I have picked out one of the more important issues. The one right before the climax is one where Mrs. Wilson offers Boyd some clothes and Boyd respectfully declines, which is a shock for Mrs. Wilson, since she has put him in the box of being poor, needing new clothes and food. The climax is where Mrs. Wilson gets offended over Boyd refusing to take the clothes that she offered because of the simple fact that he does not need them. But I also feel like it's the point where Mrs. Wilson realizes that Boyd isn't the African American she has always put in the box. Falling action. Boyd apologizes for respectfully refusing to take the clothes, and Mrs. Wilson says that he should be happy that she offered it, and that there are plenty of other people that would love to take the clothes, and she is disappointed for him for not taking the clothes. Conclusion. It ends with the boy saying, "Is your mother still mad?" Mrs. Wilson heard Boyd ask in a low voice, "I don't know," Johnny said. "She is screwy sometimes. So is mine," Boyd said. He hesitated. "After you, my dear Alphonse," which they aren't. They just have certain beliefs and set in their ways, and when those beliefs get rattled, they don't know how to react.
Okay. Mrs. Wilson is both the protagonist and the antagonist. She is the protagonist because she thinks that she's the hero herself. She thinks that she's like saving this little Negro boy and giving him clothes and all of this. But in reality, the boys, they think she's very discriminating, and she's actually really cruel, and she's racist. So that makes her both the protagonist and the antagonist. Boyd, he is a flat character because he doesn't undergo any development, and he's a big part of Mrs. Wilson's conflict. Mrs. Wilson's son, Johnny, he is a minor character because he's not very described in the story, and he doesn't really play a big part of the story.
Okay, the point of view is third person. We don't hear about their thoughts, we just see the actions like a camera. And the settings, it's in a house, and it's in 1943, and it's the middle or middle upper class.
Throughout this story, they say "After You, My Dear Alphonse" a lot. The boys say it to each other. And we figured out, we did a little research, and we figured out that it's a comic strip made about two Frenchmen. So the first Frenchman, this one, says "You first, my dear Gaston," and then the second one says "After you, my dear Alphonse," which is basically them being overly polite. And we feel like that is kind of a symbol on mother's conflict she's having with herself, like her not being able to see that he doesn't need any help, she's on the same level. So them, the boys being overly sweet and doesn't have any discrimination between each other, it's basically to show that there shouldn't be any discrimination. The boys don't have it, so why should the mother? But the mother can't figure that out. So this is a symbol on the mother's conflict. In themes, we chose 3, a major one and 2 little ones. The first one is racial prejudice, because the mother is racial. She puts him in this little box where he belongs. She thinks like all the African Americans are in this box and all the white people are in another box, and they can't really mix. Which is why we have narrow-mindedness. She can't understand that he is in the middle upper class. He doesn't need to have clothes from her. Her mother doesn't work. His mother doesn't work, sorry. And which is basically why she's so narrow-minded. She can't figure out why that is. And then we go to the stereotypes, because she puts him in this little box and she puts up with all the other African Americans when he's actually in the middle of a class, which I said.